Welcome to the Archive Mystery. It is an absolute privilege to have you back with me tonight. Before we step into the deep, suffocating, and unforgiving wilderness of tonight's mystery, I need you to take a moment to prepare yourself. Go ahead and grab your favorite snacks, pour yourself a tall, fresh, cold drink, and find the absolute most comfortable position in your bed. Pull the heavy blanket up over your shoulders. Let the muscles in your neck completely relax, listen closely to the steady sound of my voice, and let yourself drift off to a deep, dreamless sleep, if you can. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in a story format, then you have found your permanent home, because that is exactly what we do here. Before we head to the scene, if you enjoy our content, please invite the like button on an exclusive, private airboat tour through the Florida swamps. Tell them you have packed a delicious picnic lunch for the ride, but right when you reach the deepest, darkest part of the alligator-infested water, hand them a plastic spoon, push them out of the boat, and quietly speed away into the fog. Now, let us get into today's story. If you were to step into the heart of the Florida Everglades, specifically an area known as the Big Cypress National Preserve, you would instantly find yourself in one of the most brutal, haunting, and completely inhospitable landscapes on the North American continent. If you are in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, you have likely experienced moments in your life where you felt overwhelmed. You know what it feels like to carry a heavy burden. But the weight of the Everglades is physical. It is a place where the air is so thick with absolute humidity that drawing a breath feels like pulling water into your lungs. It is a primeval, ancient maze of massive cypress domes, jagged limestone rocks hidden under the mud, and black, stagnant water that serves as the undisputed kingdom for massive alligators and highly venomous cottonmouth snakes. It is a place where the sun bleaches the tall sawgrass until the blades are sharp enough to slice right through human skin. The profound, heavy silence of the swamp is only occasionally broken by the distant, prehistoric drone of massive insects. This is not a place where human beings are meant to stay. It is a place where, if you make a single, solitary mistake, the swamp will quietly bury you, and your story will disappear forever. On the morning of July 23, 2018, two experienced thru-hikers named Nicholas Horton and Logan Bueller were pushing their way through this exact, unforgiving landscape. They were following the Florida National Scenic Trail, a grueling, punishing trek that tests the physical limits and the mental sanity of even the most hardened outdoorsman. Nicholas and Logan were completely exhausted. Their legs were heavily scratched by the thick, unforgiving brush, their clothes were soaked with sweat, and they were desperately looking for a place to sit down and rest. As they slowly approached a designated, primitive clearing in the swamp known to hikers as Noble's Camp, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. The heavy air did not just smell like the usual, earthy rot of the swamp water. It carried a sharper, sweeter, and far more clinical scent. It was the undeniable smell of organic decay. And then, they saw it. Sitting right in the middle of the dark, muddy floor of the forest was a flash of brilliant, neon yellow. It was a high-end hiking tent, perfectly pitched, pulled tight, and seemingly brand new. Nicholas and Logan immediately stopped in their tracks. Usually, in a place this incredibly remote and dangerous, seeing another person's gear brings a massive sense of relief. It is a moment of shared community in the wild. You expect to see a fellow hiker boiling water or drying their socks. But this bright yellow tent was completely silent. There was no smoke rising from a morning campfire. There were no wet muddy boots sitting outside the flap to dry in the sun. There was just this stagnant, brightly colored pod sitting perfectly still in the dark shadows of the cypress trees. Nicholas stepped forward, feeling a sudden, heavy drumbeat of anxiety against his ribs. He stood a few feet away and called out, "Hello?" "Is anyone home in there?" The only response was the low, heavy buzzing of flies. Nicholas slowly leaned down. He reached out and unzipped the mesh windscreen of the tent just a few inches. He peered inside the dark interior. Lying flat on a foam sleeping mat was the body of a man. He was emaciated to the point of being almost completely unrecognizable as a human being. His skin was pulled so tight over his ribs and his cheekbones that he looked like an anatomical specimen in a medical laboratory. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly up at the nylon ceiling of the tent, and his mouth was locked in a haunting, silent scream. This was the incredibly tragic discovery of the man the world would eventually come to call mostly harmless. When the detectives and deputies from the Collier County Sheriff's Office arrived at the remote scene, they expected this to be a routine, albeit tragic, wilderness recovery. Usually, when a body is found in the deep woods, there is a clear, logical cause of death, and there is almost always a way to easily identify the victim. But as the crime scene investigators put on their gloves and began to carefully catalog the items inside and around that yellow tent, the fundamental logic of the entire situation began to completely fall apart. This man was not a drifter. He was not a homeless person who had accidentally wandered off the highway tracks and gotten lost. He was carrying incredibly expensive, high-end outdoor equipment. He had premium, copper-colored trekking poles and a trademark gray Columbia baseball hat. But most strikingly, he was carrying a handwritten notebook. When investigators opened it, they did not find a diary or a suicide note. They found hundreds of pages of incredibly complex, handwritten computer programming code. It was brilliant, advanced logic written for an online programming game called Screeps. As they dug deeper into his heavy backpack, they found a plastic bag containing $3,500 in cash, mostly in crisp $20 bills, neatly tucked into his gear. And yet, despite having thousands of dollars and highly advanced technical intelligence, there were things missing that made absolutely no logical sense. He had no wallet. He had no driver's license. He had no credit cards. He had no cell phone. And most baffling of all, for a man navigating one of the most treacherous, confusing landscapes in America, he had no global positioning system. He had no map. Think about the sheer, terrifying impossibility of that choice. This man was deep in the Florida backcountry, an area where professional, lifelong swamp guides can easily get turned around and lost. He possessed the technical intelligence to write highly advanced software by hand. He had enough cold, hard cash in his backpack to buy his way out of almost any bad situation. He could have paid someone to drive him across the country. And yet, he had intentionally walked into the deadliest wilderness in the state with absolutely no way to call for help, no way to navigate, and no way to tell the world who he was if he was found dead. And then there was the final, most broken piece of logic, the food. Just outside the tent, carefully protected from the animals, investigators found a cache of supplies. He had food. He was not starving because he had run out of rations. He was starving because he had simply, intentionally, stopped eating. Furthermore, Noble's camp was only exactly 5 miles away from Interstate 75, a massive, busy, major highway. He could have unzipped his tent, stood up, and reached total safety and a warm meal in less than 2 hours of walking. Instead, he chose to lay down on his sleeping pad in that yellow tent, and slowly, agonizingly, let his own life force evaporate into the humid swamp air until his adult body weighed only 83 pounds. As the news of the discovery broke, the internet mobilized into a massive, global digital search party. This was the peak age of social media, and the bizarre mystery of the hiker with no name went completely viral. Groups on Reddit and Facebook, filled with tens of thousands of members, began to piece together his physical journey. Very quickly, hikers from New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Georgia began posting photographs they had taken on their own trips. They recognized him instantly. They had met him on the Appalachian Trail over a year earlier, starting all the way up in New York. They remembered him as a deeply friendly, quiet, and polite man with young, kind eyes and a massive, heavy red backpack that weighed nearly 60 pounds. He had told everyone he met that his trail name was mostly harmless, a light-hearted reference to a famous book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He sat around campfires with complete strangers, sharing stories. He told people he was an information technology professional from Brooklyn, New York, who had simply decided he wanted to detox from the digital world. He wanted to leave the screens, the stress, and the grinding rat race behind. In the photographs posted online, he is always smiling. He looks peaceful. He was the man everyone liked, the man everyone offered a piece of food to, but fundamentally, he was a man nobody truly knew. For 2.5 agonizing years, the mystery of Mostly Harmless remained completely uncrackable. The authorities sent his deoxyribonucleic acid, his DNA, to the most advanced, high-tech forensic laboratories in the country. His fingerprints were run through every single Federal Bureau of Investigation criminal database, military database, and immigration file. The results came back with absolutely nothing. 0 matches. It was as if this man had simply appeared out of thin air on a hiking trail in 2017, walked thousands of miles, just to die in the swamp in 2018. Internet sleuths spent thousands of hours comparing his teeth, which were noted to be in absolutely perfect, pristine condition, to the dental records of missing persons all across North America. They theorized he was a missing child who had been abducted in the 1980s. They theorized he was a brilliant white-collar criminal on the run from the government. But every single theory, every single lead, hit a massive brick wall of total silence. The breakthrough, when it finally happened, did not come from a massive government agency or a multi-million-dollar forensic lab. It came from a single, random photograph shared on a Facebook group. A former friend living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was scrolling through his phone when he saw the viral photo of the smiling hiker sitting on a log. The friend felt a sudden, freezing chill go down his spine. He recognized the face. He recognized the specific shape of his eyes. And most importantly, he recognized the faint, horizontal scar on the man's abdomen that investigators had noted in the autopsy. The hiker's real name was Vance Rodriguez. And once that name was finally spoken out loud, the beautiful, romantic legend of the gentle hiker finding himself in nature began to violently crumble, revealing a reality that was far darker, and far sadder, than anyone on the internet had ever imagined. Vance Rodriguez was indeed a brilliant programmer, just as his notebooks suggested. But he was also a man who had spent his entire adult life surrounded by a chaotic, heavy storm of profound anger, depression, and domestic violence. Shortly after his name was released, his ex-girlfriend, who had lived with him for 5 years in New York, came forward. She described a life behind closed doors that was filled with absolute terror. She described him as a deeply troubled, abusive partner who had subjected her to severe physical and emotional trauma. That scar on his stomach? The one that the medical examiners had initially assumed was from a routine, surgical appendix removal? It was actually the physical remnant of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Vance had tried to violently end his own life years before he ever bought a tent or stepped onto a hiking trail. When the New York police finally went to his old, abandoned apartment in Brooklyn, they did not find the home of a man who was happily planning a grand adventure into nature. They found a dark, silent tomb of a life that had simply been dropped. His passport was sitting out on the table. His credit cards were still tucked inside a drawer. There was stale food still sitting on the shelves in the pantry from over 2 years ago. He had not planned a hiking trip. He had simply woken up one afternoon in April of 2017, walked out of his apartment, boarded a train, and started walking south. He did not tell his mother he was leaving. He did not tell his sister. He did not leave a note. And perhaps the most logically heartbreaking part of this entire story is this: when Vance Rodriguez disappeared from society, nobody reported him missing. Not a single person filed a police report. His friends and family were so used to his dark moods, his sudden disappearances, and his emotional outages, that they simply assumed he wanted to be left alone. So, they left him alone. Vance Rodriguez walked for over 1,000 miles. He spent hundreds of lonely nights sleeping under the stars, sitting by fires, and talking to kind strangers who thought he was a modern-day hero for leaving the heavy burdens of the modern world behind. But Vance was not walking toward nature. He was not looking for enlightenment. He was desperately running away from the wreckage of the man he had become. When he finally reached the end of the trail in the dark, sweltering swamps of Florida, he sat down in his yellow tent, and he decided he simply would not go any further. He did not die because he made a navigational mistake. He did not die because he ran out of money or food. He died because he had finally reached the absolute end of his own internal map. He defied the most basic biological logic of human survival because, in his mind, there was absolutely nothing left in the world worth surviving for. His story is a haunting, heavy reminder for anyone listening tonight. You can buy the best gear. You can change your name to something harmless. You can burn your identification, leave your money behind, and walk into the deepest, darkest woods on the face of the earth. But no matter how far you walk, you can never, ever truly escape the person you see in the mirror. Thank you for listening tonight. If you are safe in your bed, take a deep breath. Let go of the things you cannot change, forgive yourself for the mistakes of your past, and let the darkness take you. Sleep, if you can. Good night.